Just as the president has crashed the stock market with his illegal tariffs, he has crashed the justice system with his dreadful appointments and vindictive policies. He's filled the leadership of the Department of Justice with his personal lawyers, unapologetically extremist sycophants like Kash Patel and Ed Martin, who elevate their devotion to Trump over any semblance of fidelity to the Constitution, the rule of law, and the rules of professional responsibility.
Welcome to an edition of Legal AF and Court Accountability Action. I'm Michael Popok, of course, joined by Alex Aronson. Alex, I don't know what you were doing the last few days, but I was glued to the hearings being conducted by Senator Schiff and Jamie Raskin, Representative Raskin, as the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee. These bicameral spotlight hearings, that's a phrase I hadn't heard before, but I'm so glad that they exist. Just on the edge of my seat about what is happening. And in getting ready for today, I was looking through a lot of things that are being posted online. And I don't know if the call is get me Jamie Raskin. Jamie Raskin is on it, or look in the air, it's a bird, it's a plane, it's Jamie Raskin. But that is how the Democrats are seeing the fight. That we need somebody who is pugilistic, but just has this tremendous heft when it comes to constitutional analysis and sort of a moral conscience that's leading the way for the Democrats. Because we have to find our way. We have to find our voice. We have to find our way. It's not about getting, sent to the mat. It's how we get off the mat and move it forward. Did you get a chance to see the hearings, Alex?
Yeah, it was amazing. And, I think such an important step for House Democrats and Senate Democrats to take as Republicans hold the gavels in both chambers and are, all too good at, setting the narrative agenda. And this is just such a great model for the ways in which we can actually lay out for the American people what is actually happening. And Representative Raskin, of course, had this amazing history with the January 6th committee, a bipartisan January 6th committee, breaking down the systematic assault on our democracy that Donald Trump and the broader so-called Stop the Steal movement led. I had the great honor of testifying before one of these spotlight hearings last year when Representative Raskin, as the ranking member of the Oversight Committee in the House, and Representative Ocasio-Cortez confronted directly the threat of judicial capture and the flagrant corruption happening at the Supreme Court. And so heading into what is, a very challenging period in our history, it's just essential that we have these opportunities to lift up not only the truth of what's happening here, but also the stories of courage and bravery that were on display at that hearing, right? We heard from Rachel Cohen, the Skadden Arps associate who stuck her neck out and said, this isn't how it should go. This is not what it means to be a lawyer. We can't capitulate to autocracy.
By the way, that's my old law firm. I started there as a first year. So I cut my teeth at Skadden.
Yeah. Or the extraordinary testimony of the DOJ pardons attorney who was subjected to incredible bullying and abuse, and then indeed the almost the deployment of armed forces to her home to try to stop her from testifying at this hearing. So, it's bringing what's happening in this country into stark relief so that people can understand what's happening and then start to mobilize against it.
One of my favorite quotes by Representative Raskin I caught on his social media posting. It's a scary time. So feel the fear, metabolize the fear, transcend the fear, and rise up with other people with courage and stand tall. And that's what our Mightiest Mighty and LegalAFers and Court Accountability Action being together stands for. We are so honored to bring in Representative Jamie Raskin of the Maryland 8th, and more importantly for these times, the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee. Welcome, Representative Raskin.
Michael, I'm delighted to be with you and to be with Alex, and thanks for everything you guys have been doing to hang tough.
Yeah, thank you very much. We do it for the audience. It's what gets us up in the morning. I know that's what gets you, started with your day. Talk to us about how you thought the hearings, the bicameral spotlight hearings, the purpose of them, and how do you think it went in terms of presenting to the American people our argument that we have as we know, a rogue president who is constantly attacking the rule of law?
It was dramatic. It demonstrated to me the very painful human dimension to this thoroughgoing assault on the law. So here you've got Liz Oyer, who is a fantastic lawyer who's devoted her life to pardons. And, they have a whole system at the Department of Justice. She was the pardon attorney. They collect all the petitions coming in from around the country. She said, in addition to the essential injustice and arbitrariness of allowing Donald Trump just to grant pardons to his friends and to his political allies, there's a double injustice because there are people who really need pardons out there who are completely ignored by this system of favoritism and patrimonialism, But then the thing that blew my mind was when she talked about just the brutal indifference and callousness of what they did to her. They wanted her to do something that was not within the purview of their office, which was to sign a statement restoring gun rights to Mel Gibson. And she explained, I take it, that this was not the basic jurisdiction of the pardon office. It had nothing to do with it. But when they pressed her on it, she said, well, if you're asking me to do this, there's this history of domestic violence, and there's not, it didn't appear like she had anything before her that justified his being restored his gun rights, and she wouldn't do it. And then she got sacked, and she was out of there. But the brutal part was, she's a mom with kids, government servants like her, even in very significant offices, like the pardon attorney for the United States, don't make a lot of money. And they're telling her, she's going to be kicked off of her health insurance in 4 or 5 days. She's out of the office. She's locked out of the office. And there's that human dimension for people that we keep hearing about. And there is a lot of fear out there.
And, somebody like Liz Oyer represents like I think that something like the purest commitment to the rule of law, to even-handed application of the law. These are career civil servants at places like the Justice Department, who have committed their careers to serving the public and to serving the Constitution. They've sworn an oath to the Constitution. And in these 3 months, what we've seen from this MAGA Doge administration is the very flip side of that, the complete opposite mentality, where the law is a weapon, the law is to be used to reward friends and allies and to punish and seek retribution against dissenters. This has been the strategy of the attacks on the law firms that Rachel Cohen testified about. This is the strategy that we've seen, I think, in some of the most alarming executive orders to date, targeting people like Miles Taylor for speaking out, or Mr. Krebs for just Christopher Krebs for just doing his job. And this is, if you look at authoritarian regimes around the world, the strategies of fascist dictatorships, this is what they do, right? They seek retribution. They aim to chill and quiet people. And far too many, looking across the landscape, seem to be capitulating. And we've got these, I think, stories of inspiration like these folks represent. How can we process what's happening? How can we encourage more of this type of courage, build support around them? What can regular people do? What can political leaders do to help pull the ship in the right direction here?
Well, Alex, you're right to start by talking about the authoritarians, because the kind of law that is being practiced by Donald Trump and his henchmen was the law for a hell of a long time before the Enlightenment and before the American Revolution. There was always a rule of law, but it was the idea that rulers could do whatever they want. And the law was there to control the rabble and the people who don't have wealth and power. And they want to go back to that. Elon Musk and the Silicon Valley Mafia and Donald Trump, they want to go back to the idea that the law doesn't apply to them in any way. They're not bound by the law, and they can use the law to crush other people. And what we're trying to stand up for is the rule of law as it's evolved since the American Revolution and through all of the civilizing movements that have establish due process, equal protection, real freedom of speech, free exercise of religion, everything it is that they want to trample right now. That's the importance of what the Supreme Court did yesterday in the deportation case of Mr. Garcia. If they can do it to him, if they can just sweep people off of the street and put them on an airplane and ship them to a torturer's prison in an authoritarian state in El Salvador without due process, and then not bring him back, claiming that they have no control over El Salvador, even though we are in a contract with them and we're paying them to hold these people, even though they're clearly our agent in the affair, they could do it to anybody. And then we are back to that old kind of rule of law, which is just the rule of the kings and the queens and the law of the rulers, as opposed to the idea that the law must apply to people who have power and great wealth too.
And Sonia Sotomayor, I'm sure you saw it, Representative Raskin, in her statement along with the Abrego Garcia decision, basically said that to take the government at its word. They believe that they can take, and she said, even U.S. citizens, not just green card holders under an order of protection like Abrego Garcia, but U.S. citizens, take them off, as you said, to the deep, dark recesses of a killer prison in another country, which doesn't make it foreign affair. That was my problem. We'll get to the Roberts Court in a minute. But the statement that he said, you have to be careful, Judge Zinnes, when you get this back, you have to be mindful of the president's powers in the area of foreign affairs. This isn't foreign affairs. It's just he chose a prison to offload our detainees in that happens to be outside the country. That's not a foreign affairs issue the way I think our founding fathers would have seen it. And the problem you have, as we all know, but let's frame it for our audience, you've got the top 4 positions in the Department of Justice are all Donald Trump's former criminal defense lawyers. Okay, you've got or impeachment lawyers. You've got Bondi, you've got Todd Blanche, the bad cop number 2. You got Emil Bove, and you got number 4, John Sauer, who is the criminal appellate lawyer for all of that. And so, for anybody to think that they would suddenly shed their responsibilities for their criminal defendant client and suddenly become the people's lawyers. For us, we're seeing what's happening: the attack on law firms, the attack on judges through the names they use, the Orwellian names they use, the Rogue Act, which we'll talk about. So you want to change also the vocabulary, which I love. And you have another word for this, what's becoming a little bit tiresome, the constitutional crisis. And you have another, I don't mean to set you up with this. So you have another phrase for it.
Yeah, well, if I'm remembering correctly, when people say, are we in a constitutional crisis, it's way too abstract and vague for my taste. We've got a thoroughgoing attack on the U.S. Constitution taking place. And so we're in a constitutional fight. We're basically in a fight to defend the Constitution against people who would throw the whole thing away. I mean, the idea of sending our people to foreign prisons is not new. I mean, that's what Guantanamo Bay has been used for at different times. And there have been other people who've said, well, let's get out from under the straitjacket of the Constitution and let's send these people elsewhere so we can do whatever we want. That is an invitation to torture. And I've got to remind people sometimes the 8th Amendment is in the Constitution for a reason. Our founders wanted to ban cruel and unusual punishment. They understood the logic of arbitrary power and dictatorship.
Yeah, and Sotomayor mentioned, and don't forget about the Convention Against Torture. You're not allowed to do that either. You need to abide by that. It's interesting, though, on the Abrego Garcia decision, I was struck by the fact that, assuming we're right on doing the math, 9 justices all got together. None of them thought, even the Democratically appointed wing of the Supreme Court, thought it was worth having the Supreme Court or have the power to order the return of Abrego Garcia. That is not what that order did yesterday. That order said we reinforce the decision of a trial judge, which is great because Zinnes had been attacked as a Marxist, leftist, rogue judge by everybody. That's not what the Supreme Court said. We like everything about your order, except we don't like the word, we like the word facilitate. We don't like the word effectuate. Talk about, all right. And be careful when you do the effectuating definition when you get it back. But they also, you have Sotomayor telling her, keep the government, keep their feet to the fire, but with no direction. This is the problem with the shadow docket. This bare bones, no time for reflection, no briefing issue as the Trump administration tries to exploit the shadow docket and catch and get those 4 + 1, 5 total votes in their favor over and over and over again. What can we do about the shadow docket?
That's a good question. I think Steve Vladeck has advanced some proposals, and I can't remember what they are. Alex might remember. That decision yesterday did feel to me very much like a political compromise. There were people who understood it was an outrageous, flagrant violation of due process, and they should be ordering the administration to do it. There were obviously people in the hard right of the court who don't like getting in Trump's way at all, but also understood that if they didn't agree with this, they essentially were saying that they had sold the Constitution down the river. Because what does it mean if the government has got the power to sweep people off the street and send them to a foreign prison with no judicial review and there's no recourse? And the whole concept that, we've got nothing to do with it now. They're in the hands of, the dictator of El Salvador. That is such an insult to reality and what actually took place there. If you've got the means and power to put our people over there, whether they're citizens or permanent residents or any other legal resident or anybody in the United States, then you find the means to get them back.
Or you can't send them there. Maybe Mr. Ruveni, who lost his job over telling the truth and was cited in the first 3 lines of the decision, maybe he'll be a witness at your next hearing.
Yeah.
Representative, I'm glad you brought up Steve Vladeck. He's a wonderful constitutional law scholar at Georgetown who wrote the book on the shadow docket and proposes some really important reforms around transparency and process. And he's observed we're starting to see maybe a little bit more transparency out of the court and reasoning, although it's pretty threadbare in terms of how they're actually reaching the outcomes and explaining their decisions. And of course, that is the thrust and the central locus of the Supreme Court's power is its ability to persuade and reason. And if it's going off on its own to decide questions on an emergency basis without briefing or argument, with minimal reasoning, it's hard to look at what it's doing as sort of law qua law. And meanwhile, we're also seeing, as Michael mentioned, this full frontal attack by MAGA on lower court judges. Your committee, the full committee, did a hearing last week exploring the limitations of judicial power, which was followed by an aggressive move by MAGA Republicans in the House to try to constrain lower court judges from providing the type of relief that so many of these lower court judges have provided. What's interesting to me is that over the last several years, as these stories of corruption and abuse of power and outcome-oriented decision-making from mostly the Roberts wing and the Alito-Thomas wing of the court have come down, what these same voices have said is that any criticism of the courts, any efforts to pass legislation that could constrain them, hold them to basic ethics standards, that's an assault and infringement on judicial independence. Seems like they're trying to have their cake and eat it too, or am I missing something here?
No, I mean, the having their cake and eating it too is our daily bread, Alex. So I mean, I don't even really notice that kind of
self-confidence
or hypocrisy anymore.
Do you guys get cake?
Yeah, right. But what's interesting about this move to strip so-called nationwide injunctions or universal injunctions, as they were known for a long time, is that the Republicans were thriving on nationwide universal injunctions for a long time. We identified the problem of judicial forum shopping with Judge Kaczmarek from Texas, where Republicans were lining up around the block to get into his courtroom, knowing that he was the only judge in the district. So they were going to get him. And he is an unreconstructed right-wing theocrat who doesn't believe in a wall of separation between church and state. And so they were getting him to rule on things like mifepristone. Even then, we never said, destroy the tool in the toolbox that's a nationwide injunction. We just said, stop judicial forum shopping. Let's focus on that. But, now there are more than 65 preliminary injunctions and temporary restraining orders that have been entered by courts across the land against this lawlessness. And so they're saying, stop nationwide injunctions. Now, I think only around a third of them are nationwide injunctions. In other words, the courts are being quite, selective and discriminating in terms of when they use it and how they use it. There's not really a problem that they're responding to, but suddenly they've changed their tune about the whole thing. They never complained. They never complained about it before. They're also talking about impeaching judges. We've got colleagues who've put up wanted posters in, the Cannon House Office Building, the Longworth House Office Building. There have only been 15 judges impeached at the federal level in American history, and all of them are for things like taking bribes on the bench, corruption, income tax evasion, and so on. One was habitual drunkenness, not even occasional drunkenness, but habitual drunkenness on the bench. We've never had a judge who's been impeached because of doctrinal disagreement, because of a particular ruling. And now they're saying, we want to impeach all these people, and they don't even explain what they think is wrong with the reasoning of the judge in a particular case. They just say, this judge went against, King Trump. And so obviously he should be impeached. I mean, it's so humiliating and embarrassing.
If you were ever to ask and get an honest answer from a colleague or somebody in MAGA about, all right, let's take your position at face value about you don't want federal judges providing any type of check or balance or oversight over the president, and you want them to lay down for whatever the president, the executive branch rules. What is the check and balance then that the framers envisioned for the president? If you have Congress controlled effectively by his same party, what is, you agree with me that there is supposed to be a check and a balance. What is it? And what is the federal court's role in that check and balance? What would they say?
Again, as Alex was saying, they changed their tune according to, the particular occasion. I mean, when Biden was president, they were all about congressional power and judicial review. They sued him to stop forgiveness of college student loans, which looks very pale and tiny compared to the kinds of things they're doing now, like massive unilaterally imposed tariffs to create a trade war against the whole world, except for Russia, of course. But yeah, they were into that. But now I think they have fallen into what is psychologically and emotionally for them a more natural home, which is to just bow down to the executive power. And, every other word out of their mouth is Trump won the election. Trump won a landslide, which is of course
seven battleground states. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. I mean, Trump won overall by 2 million votes. Biden beat him by 7 million votes in 2020. Not only did they not say, oh, therefore we will accept all of Biden's program, they fought Biden's program every step along the way, including suing him. And Trump never accepted his election in the first place, despite 60 federal and state court rulings in support of his election.
Alex, why don't we move to the Supreme Court? Well, we call it shorthand the Roberts Court. I just don't see that any longer. It's for most of the things dealing with presidential power, especially. It's 4 votes in the can before you even get there with Thomas, Alito, Kavanaugh, and Gorsuch. You got 3 on the other side, of course, and then it's the 2 swings, which is Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett, and we got to run the table and get both, and they only have to get one of the 2. And this is the problem. This is why we're 0-3 or 1-4 in the last 4 decisions by the Supreme Court when it finally gets there. So is this the Roberts Court? What court is this?
It's very much the Roberts Court, and I think it's the Roberts Court that brought us to this moment quite directly. You can, and it's not a recent development, right? This is the Federalist Society's project that's gone on for decades now, and that, incrementally through rulings on allowing unlimited money in politics and greenlighting voter suppression and allowing partisan gerrymandering have slowly but dramatically eroded these levers of Democratic pushback. And then, of course, it came to a head last year in the Trump versus United States immunity decision, which not only was composed of a majority that had at least two justices who plainly should have been recused under federal law, but which, through its manipulation and delay of the calendar in that case, very clearly was working to keep Trump from being held accountable. And then when they reached the merits of the decision, very much created the conditions that we are living under now in terms of the broad expansion of executive power, pursuing what has been a decades-long agenda around the expansion of the unitary, the so-called unitary executive theory. This is a theory that when Reagan's Justice Department in 1986 in Boucher versus Sinar, when the Young Federalist Society lawyers brought that theory to the Supreme Court, Sandra Day O'Connor, a Republican appointee, said, "This is a kind of a novel theory you're espousing. I don't see this in any of our precedents." But here we are now, with the court having created this consolidated, near-monarchical executive power, which Trump has, claimed as a kingly power. And this has, I think, been the central driving force of this constitutional breakdown that we're seeing, where, the court no longer seems to be as useful or capable a check as it once was, and where we've got a Congress, a gerrymandered Congress, where Mike Johnson has the majority because of North Carolina's gerrymandered maps that gave him that narrow majority, who are completely in the thrall to this aspiring autocrat. And so I think that's the question now, right? What will this court do? What will these, I wouldn't think of them as swing justices, but what will they do? And what can they do when push comes to shove on some of these big questions that are going to come before them?
Representative Raskin, give us your quick view about the Supreme Court and what do you think our viewers should know about going forward over from now to the midterms, at least, about the role of the Supreme Court against Donald Trump?
Well, the federal judiciary as a whole is in much better shape, as we've seen, than is the Supreme Court. So I don't want people to completely lose faith in the judiciary. These judges have been standing up and doing their jobs. That's why they're talking about impeaching all these people. I mean, if you look at, for example, the birthright citizenship case, where Trump, on the first day in office, purported to nullify the citizenship of children born in America if their parents weren't citizens. We've had 4 courts strike that down. We had an Obama judge, a Biden judge, a Bush judge, and a Reagan judge. The Reagan judge said it was the easiest case he had decided in 4 decades on the bench. He said this was blatantly unconstitutional. You don't have to be a lawyer to understand what's wrong with it. You just have to know how to read. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. That's the first sentence of the 14th Amendment, reversing the Dred Scott decision. So we've been in a mode where we are very strongly defending judicial independence. At the same time, as you say, Michael, we've been demanding a real ethics code, because every state Supreme Court in America's got one, and every judge in the federal system has got one, and it should apply all the way to the top. The main thing politically we've got to understand about the Roberts Court is this is the court, as Donald Trump bragged during the campaign, that he crafted in his image. He sliced it and diced it and packed it and stacked it in order to overthrow Roe versus Wade in the Dobbs decision. And, that functional majority has done some serious damage in some other ways. I can't think of anything more damaging than the presidential immunity decision, because in some sense that set the table for the nightmare we're living through right now. I mean, Donald Trump really believes that he acts with complete immunity and impunity, and wants to extend that through the use of the pardon power to the people who surround him, so they will always do his will. So we're in a dangerous posture there. On the other hand, I believe that Chief Justice Roberts is a smart lawyer and a smart man, and I think he is feeling the weight now of those decisions that they rendered to bolster Donald Trump and to build him up. And a lot of the future of our country rides on Amy Coney Barrett and what she will do. She's also another very astute, intelligent lawyer. And judge. And I hope that the two of them will rise to the occasion. I mean, the people who serve on the Supreme Court are the only jurists in the federal system who get the title justice. That's got to mean something, right? They're not just called judges or Your Honor. They're called justice. And so they've got to do some justice here because everything in our Constitution is at stake. Freedom and liberty in our country are on the line right now.
Representative Raskin, you also reminded me of Judge Kofenor when you talked about the birthright citizenship in that case. And he said in his decision, the first injunction against the Trump administration, 5 days in to this administration, he said, we don't want to be in a situation where people look back and ask, where were the judges and where were the lawyers? We know where Representative Jamie Raskin is. He's fighting hard for our democracy and for the Democrats. And it is really for me, he's the shining light that, but not just you. You need other people behind you, right? We saw what 9 or 8 sessions of the Joint House Special Select on Jan 6 did to the American people and their decisions on how to vote. Not much. And hopefully you continuing to bring to the public with your searing intellect, your social media, your speeches on the House floor, your oversight and judiciary hearings is going to make a difference at the midterms. I only half joke. Give me the midterms, give me the House and the Senate, and I'll give you an impeachment and a conviction. And I hope that something like that could happen with your leadership. Thank you for being with us today on the show.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you for having me, and keep up the great work, you guys.
We will. Thank you. Representative Jamie Raskin, Maryland's 8th, joining Court Accountability Action and LegalAF. In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the LegalAF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at LegalAF MTN. That's at LegalAF MTN.